Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to episode 2 of the Nature of Nationalism podcast with Carl and myself, Jerome. So thank you for tuning back in. Brand new show here. We are going to do a little bit of a one-off episode as well. Hopefully, we can keep this to an hour. And it's going to be about the state of the British economy. And I think we have to do this because I think there's a lack of knowledge in the nationalist community about economics and in the whole country as well, for the general population, because people aren't educated about it, and that is for a reason as well. I mean, there is the old Henry Ford quote: "If people knew how the central banking system run in this country, there would be," and in America he was talking about, it applies to here. He said there would be a revolution overnight. So we do have to understand these things, as dull as they might appear to be. I hope today that I give you some exciting commentary and analysis, though. What do you
Yeah,
think?
well, I'm here obviously to represent a bit of the grug. Now, my understanding of the economy is not great, although I do try to keep up to date with things. So the reason this episode's come about is because of the recent rises in interest rates from the Bank of England and their comments on wage growth and whatnot. And to me, it just seemed it just seemed a little odd, given the fact that we've had inflation going on now 2 decades.
Most likely since the 2007-2008 financial crisis, which I don't think we'll touch on today, but it's really where the wheels started falling off the apple cart. Where essentially the British economy has deindustrialized. We've shipped our industry overseas, and we became a service-based and a financial-based economy. And I think we're seeing the unraveling of that model at the moment, which is why Britain is struggling, I think, more so than other European nations to control inflation. The Bank of England's having a meltdown. We'll go to that. Yes, this week the Bank of England, this week in the end of June, the Bank of England was pretty much forced to raise interest rates from 4.5% to 5%, the highest levels they've been in nearly 15 years, or over 15 years in fact, because the day before, inflation stubbornly stayed at 8.7%, which bucked the trend of most other European economies and North American economies as well. I think I'll just start to say, you might be reading, and I don't want to patronise our audience too much, but just to start off, inflation is defined as a rise in the price level or a rise in the cost of goods and services. And many things can cause that. So a rise in wages can cause that. A rise in the cost of capital, and what we mean by that is things like the cost of investments, the cost of like a factory machine or the cost of property. Another thing as well is resources, international trade, and the final factor that really affects it as well is money printing, and sort of the what has been euphemistically called for the past 13-14 years quantitative easing, which is a fancy term essentially for saying money printing, and lending out freshly printed money to financial institutions, supposedly to stabilise financial markets, but it hasn't really stabilised them, it's just inflated them to a massive degree. I hope I wasn't too in depth there.
Yeah, no. So, do you know anything about how inflation helps the debtor?
So yes, if you have let's just get a mathematical example, if you have a debt of £1,000, and inflation is running at 10% every year, then the year after it's going to that £1,000 is going to be worth £900 in a year and a back. So again, especially if your interest rate is lower than inflation, inflation reduces the cost of debt. Now, that is very good for if you're on a financial investor, if you are a bank or a financial firm or a company that's owns a lot, is in debt a lot to other institutions. And it helps if you are on a fixed rate mortgage as well. It does. That also helps as well.
And deflation is the thing that they're trying to avoid, isn't it?
Yes, because in a situation like we have now, deflation, the opposite of inflation, in a system that relies upon the ever increasing value of assets to grow the economy, if assets start falling in price, then people's investments go awry, and then that debt then becomes more expensive. Because let's say if deflation is running at 10%, then that £1,000 you borrow today is going to be the equivalent value of £1,100 in a year's time. So when you've got a debt-fueled economy where everyone's leverage meaning essentially setting down some collateral, a sum of money, borrowing money from that, and then buying then assets with that borrowed money, you can see how then people start getting what we call margin calls, where essentially their creditor rings them up and says, well, the value of your assets has gone down, and we need your money back now before it goes down further. And that's how you get a cycle like what happened in Wall Street in 1929. People were over leveraged, they had too much debt, and there was a panic. People started selling, the value of their assets started falling, and then suddenly you get a gigantic deflation in worldwide currencies. So I believe that the value of the US dollar increased. Sorry, it might be confusing. So the value of a currency increases when there's deflation. It's economics is full of these things where you get these variables that switch around. I'm sorry for that, everyone, but yeah, the US economy, the economy fell by about 40%, and I believe the value of the currency increased by 30%, with deflation was running at 30% over the Great Depression. And that's why you had people holding signs for their cars saying like, lost all my money on the stock market, here's my brand new motor car, I want $10 for it, when it was worth hundreds. Because people desperately needed that cash. Cash was in short supply. Money was in short supply.
And this is, just to jump in a minute, but this is where it gets very strange in that deflation helps the saver, the people that have large amounts of liquid assets.
Yes.
So they are then able now to take those savings and purchase properties at cheaper prices.
So liquid assets, when we say liquidity, what we mean is, again, I don't want to be too patronising, as so many of you know, liquidity just means how quickly you can sell something in the most basic sense. So, for example, money, cash, is the most liquid asset because, again, it's what we use for goods and services. But something like a house, which it takes you months, if not years, to sell in some cases, you need lawyers and everything, and underwriters and surveyors and blah, blah, blah. It takes an age. So a very illiquid asset is something like a house. So, yes, you are right. In a deflationary environment, where the price of goods, services, and assets are falling, someone with a large amount of wealth can come in and swoop up assets on the cheap.
And also people that are directly linked to the central banks, like the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve. When new money is issued, they are the first to receive that new money, aren't they? So they get to spend that new money in an environment, in a deflationary environment, so they can buy assets cheap. But then by the time it reaches the average guy or the worker,
Exactly.
Prices have been reinflated again. So,
and this is what we call the modern economy, the modern capitalism, and I don't want to use a dirty word here if this is going out on YouTube, but let's just say a den of iniquity. We'll call it that. Between central banks, and commercial banks. So central banks are the ones that print and issue currency on behalf of a government, and commercial banks, of course, are just so what we have now is a system of quantitative easing where money is created and then issued as debt to the government and then injected into the financial system to quote unquote stabilize the balance sheet of banks, and then those banks use that money then to invest where they see fit,
so
with little or no oversight.
So would it be fair to say then that we went from a what you might say a credit, well, not a credit crisis, I suppose. So we went from sort of like private debt. I'm trying to think of the word.
Well, governments have always issued debt in terms of bonds.
Yeah, I'm just thinking.
What's new about this is that it seems to have really no overall benefit to the government or the people. It's purely there to benefit the financial system, City of London, Wall Street, New York.
So what I was thinking is private. So sort of a private credit bubble in 2008, rather than it causing the collapse of the financial system, the government just switched it to a government credit bubble.
Yes, you could say that. Yes.
So they just basically offloaded all of that toxic debt onto the public finances.
Exactly. And what's happened now with the recent string of bank failures in America, and and Credit Suisse in Switzerland, and Deutsche Bank in Germany was teeter on the edge, and some British banks will be feeling the pain as well. The reason why these banks are failing is because this environment of this kind of back and forth flow of money between central banks and commercial banks relies on low interest rates, cheap debt, that there's no hope in hell of any of us and the government paying it back, in truth be told. And the theory is that the theory always was with quantitative easing is that you stabilize the financial system. That was quantitative easing 1, QE 1, and then there's been 5 rounds of QE, but they just sort of given up. And then I think QE 5 was a COVID one, but the rest of them were meant to stimulate growth in the economy. So what these brilliant economists thought was going to happen was that these banks would go out and then open up the lending facilities again, start lending to businesses, small, medium, large businesses, get people back in quality employment, get the levers of the economy, get development going again. And none of that happened. What happened was the economy was still super shaky, because again, this country is sold as industry. We don't produce anything. We don't make anything real. So when all that money disappeared in a puff of smoke in the financial crisis, because it was all just gambled and leveraged, what the banks did, they said, well, we're just going to take this money that you've very generously given us and all this bailout money, and we're just going to stuff it into government bonds, and we're going to stuff it into highly credited corporate bonds, and also the big thing in the UK, housing. We'll get onto the housing in a little bit. I'll finish this off.
Yeah, so just to jump in there, that one of the reasons that it collapsed like it did is because the housing market in America was vastly overvalued, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So the the actual value of these properties were not what was in these
Hmm.
collateralized debt obligations, I think they were.
Yeah. Yes.
So when
CDOs.
someone actually took an actual hard look at what was in them, they immediately saw that these needed to be revalued.
So, a quick one for the audience. What a collateralized debt obligation means is that, say, um, I have, instead of just set a bank writing on its balance sheet mortgage to Carl Wilkinson, £200,000 for his house, um, and have that as an individual asset, and we grade him, or he's got a decent job, or he's got a good credit score, or maybe he doesn't have a good credit score, or maybe he doesn't have a decent job, and we're going to give him a triple A rating, or we're going to give him two Bs or whatever, or a junk bond status. What they do is they mix in Carl's, mines, and hundreds of thousands of other people's mortgages, mix it into one financial product. And let's say Carl's a very, very good saver. He's got a brilliant credit score. He's rated AAA. He's all going to pay it back. And then me, you know, let's just say I'm poor. I got a terrible credit score. I've got a junk bond status. They mix mine in with his two and hundreds of thousands of others, and they say this rating is diversified. And then diversity is an MK. Well, is a one of those sort of mind control terms that they come out with in in other factors of life, but diversity in the
No, it's
financial
taken as an
world.
intrinsic good, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, in all circumstances. Essentially, it means you reduce the risk, because if one of your assets go down, the other assets that will go up. And that's what diversity means in a financial portfolio. Um, but what happened is that, because again, and the only way to blame this really is greed. Banks started offering more and more mortgages to people who couldn't afford it. House prices kept going up and up and up. So they started mixing more. From I go back to the previous example, they started mixing more people like myself in to these collateralized debt obligations, and Carl, and then rather than Carl. So then actually they say it's diversified, they say it's risk free, but you're adding more and more bad debt in, people who can't afford to pay these inflated prices for housing. And then, you think there are hundreds of thousands of individual mortgages in these documents, and there's hundreds of thousands of these sort of financial products in the market. So you can see this adds up to hundreds of billions of US dollars, not a small amount, a terrifyingly large
No.
amount.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note that a lot of these mortgages towards the end were self-assessment,
Yes.
meaning that banks were not doing credit checks.
Mm. And
So how you
there's a
could
thing with
rate something like that
yeah,
AAA, I don't know.
and there's these institutions called credit rating agencies, which again give a credit rating to financial products, corporate bonds, government bonds, collateralized debt obligations. And it's pretty much proven that during the financial crisis, a bank would go, "Can you rate my financial asset AAA, please?" And then let's say Moody's would say, "Yeah, we're not going to do that because it's full of trash." And they said, "Well, we'll just go to one of your competitors then. We'll make sure that your name on the street, on Wall Street, carries a dirty name. People who are not prepared to play ball. We'll go to one of your competitors and we'll give them all the money and the lawyers' fees instead." And that's literally what happened. I am not making a libelous statement. This is what happens. These kind of independent private institution watchdogs that are meant to be the safeguards of the financial system are just corrupt. They are filthy and corrupt. And it's the whole system, I'm afraid to say.
It's what happens when you turn everything into a market.
Hmm.
It's when everything becomes dependent upon the sale of a service or an asset. They become dependent upon the income, don't they? So
Yes.
it's inevitable that happens. It's just that's how corruption works. It always takes time, but eventually everything to do with money becomes corrupt in one way or another.
So,
So
go on.
well, just to tie this up then, So my assessment of it, after looking at it, to me it looks very similar to the theory of sort of asset deflation and debt deflation, but more importantly, they're looking for price stability. So they don't want deflation and they don't want inflation. But what that would mean is that
They want a small amount of moderate inflation. 2% is what the Bank of England's target is. That is just to stimulate investment in the economy rather than people saving. They want people's and the financial institutions to inject their money. So if you just keep your money, in your bank account, because again, in a deflationary environment, the value will be ticking up. They don't want that because, again, it removes investment, and again, companies need investment to grow, to employ more people, to improve and to grow the economy. That's what our system is based on, and there's nothing wrong with that per se, but it's the avenues of growth that our government has pursued, and it is our government is to blame. They have the power to stop this. They've always had the power to stop this, and they've chosen not to over the course of decades.
Because they will incur a cost with investors pursuing a policy of price stability, because it always means that you get sort of a stagnation of debt, commodities, services and assets, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
But that means that private profit and growth is slowed substantially. So everything just becomes sort of stagnant and still in an attempt to, bring some stability to the market. With a global economy, I don't know how possible that is. I mean, to me personally, from what I understand, that things like wage deflation and interest rate increases have always been an omen of deflation.
Yes. So what interest rates do a rise in interest rates is meant to, when inflation gets too high, is meant to again increase the cost of borrowing, and then therefore that decreases investment, which means that lowers the demand for goods and services in the economy. Back to our definition of inflation at the start. So that's what a rise in interest rates from the central bank is meant to do. The problem is that only really works when you've got what we call demand push inflation. Demand pull inflation. I do apologise. So that is when again you have people's wages rising too quickly, or people over investing in the economy, demanding too much of all these capital and things, factory machines, property, whatever, that's fine. And interest rates go up and down all the time. But the problem is what we have now in this economy. It's not a lack of demand, it's a lack of supply. So a lack of goods and services being produced, or the inputs of production, or like raw materials, things like that, the price of them being too high. So this is to do with the COVID pandemic, and of course the war in Ukraine. Putting pressure on international food supply and international oil and gas and fertilizer. The lifeblood of the economy, what we all have to survive on, food and fuel. It's not something that any human being can go without. Since the dawn of civilization, or the dawn of time. So that's what we're experiencing now, and then you can set you can still raise interest rates, and you can kill demand. You can ram it down. You can make everyone lose their job. You can put everyone on benefits. You can stop investment. You can put firms out of business because they can't afford to take a loan. But the problem is you still got the external factors that you can't control. The price of international energy, the fact that factories got international trade is still not recovered from COVID, and the silly lockdowns that caused so much problems all over the world, and they didn't really save. But so and this is what we're going to talk about now. These comments. It would have caused, if they didn't raise interest rates, there would have been a panic in financial markets. But there's two reasons, in my view, why inflation remains high in the UK. One is what every European nation is suffering at the moment. The cost of energy, when we relied on Russian oil and gas and we're not importing anymore because of international affairs. That's one. But what the extra thing the UK is struggling with is the fact that we're having record numbers of migration into this country. I believe net migration last year was 600,000. That is the highest it has ever been in the history of our country. Back to the Saxon migration, it wasn't even that high per year, and this is it's historically unprecedented. So you think you have that gigantic increase in population, people can't, and rents go through the roof. More people demanding food, more people on the roads, on public transport, more people having to find jobs, you know, and work. And of course, government expenditure goes through the roof as well, which also causes inflation because the government has to borrow money as well. So again, the government, I mean, all this Tory nonsense about austerity, it's gone out the window. They don't care. The Chancellor's the Chancellor of the Exchequer has lost the plot. Jeremy Hunt, he's completely abandoned all that Cameron, Osborne, austerity measures. They're all out the window now, trying to stop the economy from imploding. So that then, up to a side as well, that's also a reason why the UK economy hasn't gone into recession like Germany and France have. But that's only a sort of a statistical nonsense, because again, if you look at like what the average person in the country has actually become a lot poorer. But because again, if you increase the population by 5%, you're going to get growth. But like growth is not at 5%, I can tell you now. It's like at 0 point something percent, I think 0.7 or 8%. Very, very low. Yeah, any comments, Carl?
No, not really. The problem is the government has sort of forfeited its involvement in the economy in large areas, especially the private economy.
Mm-hmm.
So they spend a lot of time talking about the economy, but they don't really have much impact on it. There seems to be, since I think, going back through Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair, all the way up to Rishi Sunak, deregulation has been the rally cry, or the rallying cry of Parliament. Deregulate the banks, deregulate this. But what that does is it gives the government less control in the markets, and it gives private companies, or private asset management, more of a free hand to gamble more and more and more.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, so. I mean, it's important to mention that this is an asset bubble, isn't it? That we're experiencing, that they've got a problem with.
Yeah.
They're struggling with the asset bubbles that they're creating through this quantitative easing.
And it's now that the inflation from the quantitative easing, which is also a tertiary cause as well, is starting to bite, because production, GDP, gross domestic product, the total value of the production of goods and services in the economy is what the definition is. That's falling into an abyss. So then, if you have continued increases in the money supply in that scenario, then it's going to cause inflation.
Do you think that they gambled a bit too much on the sort of the low wage, high migration economy?
Definitely.
Rather than focusing on,
they thought
productivity.
They can keep demand high and wage growth low by doing that, bringing in low-skilled workers to compete with native people, undercutting their wages, and then about increasing demand because you've got more people in the country demanding more food, more travel, more entertainment, that kind of thing, more bank accounts, more mortgages, more rental, more rent, more renters. And I think they are that naive, or they're just that short term. You know, you have these stories now. I just to give an example. It is an American example, but it rings true. So, um, Airbus, very important. And not doesn't only make aeroplanes, of course, but it makes all sorts of um, hardware for the U.S. government and the U.S. military. Very important company for sort of the United States global empire and international security. Um, Private company. So what do the directors of the private company? Well, they they're greedy, you know. And again, nothing wrong with being greedy, but you can't have a system designed off pure greed, because you can get things like this. What they did, they took over, they loaded the company with debt, and then they just borrowed money. They used that money, that borrowed money, to buy the shares of the company on international markets. And they go to the shareholders meeting and they say, "Oh, look, your share price has gone through the roof. Yeah, we deserve this gigantic bonus that we're paying ourselves, because we've increased your share price." And then, of course, what happens is the Airbus is so loaded with debt that it can't afford to pay it back, and then it goes bankrupt and has to be bailed out by the U.S. government. But do these executives go to prison? No. Do they even get a fine? No. They get off scot-free with millions of dollars in their pockets, and there's just one example that happens, or happened to Pizza Express in this country. Exact same thing. Very profitable company, got bought out by a private equity firm, and did the
I think
exact same
Rover
thing.
was another one, wasn't it? Similar sort of thing.
And these people need to be put, in if Homeland were in charge of the country, very far off, I know, but these people would be in prison, because it is
Fraudulent.
fraud, it's theft, it's gambling with people's pensions, people's jobs. The same thing with Philip Green. So Philip Green with British Home Stores a few years ago, he did the exact same thing there. Loaded the company with debt, paid himself, bought out the shares, paid himself a gigantic bonus, and then promptly resigned and then stole the money with him. And he is still a Knight of the Realm, I think. Let me just double check that actually. He might have been disbarred.
Yes, I do remember hearing something about that. He took the pension pot, didn't he? That
Yes.
technically wasn't. It was quite a complicated one, wasn't it? But he ended up getting a fine. I think a fine of about half of what he took.
Yeah.
So not really a punishment. He
No.
made away with half of what he shouldn't have had in the first place. So, yeah, it is just corruption. I think the problem is we're just at that stage now. Our public servants are not representing their people in any capacity when it comes to the economy, and that's all of Westminster. They seem to have a fear, don't they, of the private markets?
Yeah.
They
have the foolish notion that if we do anything against the rich, they're going to run away.
Yeah.
Well, as we said, the rich in this country have their assets invested in property, in businesses. They can't just rip those out of the ground and take them to the Cayman Islands or Panama or whatever. They can't do that. Those assets are in this country. So if they want to run away and do tax avoidance, well, the government should be strong and say, well, we're going to seize your assets as payment for not paying your taxes, or defrauding pension schemes, or defrauding shareholders. You're going to pay. And this is why all it just takes is a strong government, a government that is not corrupt, and it could happen, and it could easily happen. But yeah, I think we'll come to what we want, Homeland wants with the economy towards the end. And I just want to get onto these comments from one of the chief advisors to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Bank of England in this country. So her name is Karen Ward, a respected City of London economist who serves on the Chancellor's Council Advisors and the Bank of England's Council Advisors. And she says, the Bank of England has to create a recession, partly to nip in the bud a spiral of wages going up and in turn pushing up prices and then pushing up wages again. She's talking about a wage price spiral. So what that means is, again, essentially workers get a pay rise, they start spending more in the economy, that increases the demand for goods and services, increasing demand, increase the prices, and then to pay for the higher prices, then the workers go and with unions and whatever they go and ask for more wage rises, and then the problem keeps getting worse. Again, this is a theory that I'm not convinced has been proven. Now, I have the economics degree, and I haven't really seen much empirical evidence. As a little aside, one thing I find about economics, it's not an empirical science. It's a logic-based social science, and people make theories and then try and find evidence that fits their theories. It's quite a bankrupt study, and it needs to be reformed, but that's a completely different... I'll leave that be for now. So she says, Forceful has to create a recession. So what does that mean? Small businesses go under, medium-sized businesses go under. People lose their jobs. People can't afford to pay their mortgages. People get repossessed. People can't afford to pay their rent. They get evicted. They become homeless. That's what a recession means. You know, that's what it means, Karen Ward. And you're there with your £150,000 a year job, and and she goes on to say, "Oh, come on," she says, "It's only when companies feel nervous about the future that they think." That they will think that, well, maybe I don't want to put through that price rise. Or workers, when they are a little less confident about their job, think, oh, I won't push my boss for that higher pay. Well, why don't you start taking your own advice, Karen Ward? Why don't you take a £20,000, £30,000 pay cut? You'll still be in the top 5% of earners in the UK. You'll still be a wealthy lady. Go and take your 20 grand pay cut. Just, it starts with you. It starts with
That's
you.
it. They don't lead by example, do they?
Exactly.
It's the do as I say and not as I do.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Prince Harry on a private jet just after lecturing people for going on holiday.
Exactly.
It's like they don't mean
what do you
themselves
call
when
him?
they talk about this stuff.
The fleet of private jets on the runway at every international climate conference, that kind of thing. Well,
Because so I think it's important to mention they want a recession, but they don't want deflation.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is what I mean about this sort of. So
But
they want this kind of
don't want
price
inflation
stability,
out of control. Exactly.
but they don't want the recession to lead to a deflation because that hurts the that hurts the wealthy, that hurts the banks.
Because the value of their assets go down, and they're mostly illiquid assets, properties.
Yeah.
Long-term mortgages, long-term bonds, that kind of thing.
And I don't think the government is in a very strong position at the moment in terms of being able to pull them out of another economic crisis.
No,
we are highly leveraged now, aren't we? Public debt.
It would probably lead to default. I think in the UK we are potentially heading towards a default in the next decade, maybe even sooner, which is going to be a catastrophe. And so default on the debt means that you can't afford to pay it anymore. Essentially, you can't afford to pay the interest payments, especially if interest rates are going to continue to go up. As an aside, I meant to mention earlier, the reason why these international banks are failing is because they have all these bonds on their balance sheets, which are rated to like 0.5% or 1%. So when interest rates suddenly jump to 5%, the value of those bonds drop to zero, because who wants to buy a bond which you have a 0.5% yield on when you can buy a bond which has a 5% yield on it? So that's why a lot of these banks have been going under. It causes raising interest rates so sharply and rapidly when you are in a recessionary environment. It's gonna hurt. But here's some data for you. So last year, excluding bonuses, so again excluding what the rich get paid, wage rises increased by 6.5%, and then that was in coming out of the lockdown, so we expected to be a little higher. Last year, I think inflation in the UK was about 10.5%, so we're a 4% difference in accounting. So actually, the average person got 4% poorer. So in if for the average UK worker who makes about £30,000 a year, in real terms they lost about £1,200. And of course, the UK government gives them no help with that because they have frozen the tax brackets. So you're still paying the same amount of tax that you were, despite you being poorer. So actually, you're getting a lot poorer. Everyone is getting, all ordinary people are getting a lot poorer, and people are really feeling it. You know, it's not just the cost of energy, and it's punishing 20% rise in the cost of food in a year. 20%. So your average family food bill that was £100 is now £120 a week. That's £20 more a week. For your minimum wage worker, they've got to work an extra 2 hours a week just to feed themselves. You know, but then of course businesses can't afford to give you extra hours.
So I mean, just on my own intuition, it seems that we have this policy of mass immigration. Combine that with the Bank of England's desire for price stability, ultimately leading to those people that live here in Britain are effectively being asked to consume less and less.
Consume, yes. Yes.
And
That is what's
basically
being asked of them.
for their standard of living to be lowered. So it's important to remember
the financial system and the rich fat cat bankers in London can continue their coke-fueled parties. You know, that I know is rather.
So when they
critical, but
say,
that's what's happening.
So here's one for you. When they say equality, just remember what they mean by that is that somebody in Haiti won't have the standard of living that we have. That it's that we'll eventually have the standard of living they have. And then all is equal. It's not intrinsically positive statement. The aim is to reduce consumption in the West. That's from my own intuition. Without damaging prices of properties and assets and other investments. And the way they do that is through immigration.
Yes.
So you kind of keep the demand roughly where it is for immigration, but you're not producing any more goods than what's already available. So if you're producing the same amount of goods when you had 5 million people, and then you're producing the same amount of goods when you have 10 million people, what does that mean for people? The ordinary person, the ordinary worker. Their standard of living drops by half.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just on a rough explanation, and that I think is something that's very clear, isn't it, when you look at the data around the middle class in sort of Europe and North America over the last couple of decades. Like when you look at the rest of the world's standard of living for its kind of lower and middle classes, it's gone up, whereas you look at the standard of living in the Western world, it's gone down.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting bit is when you look at the wealthiest people in Europe and America, they've just skyrocketed, haven't they?
Yes. Yes.
So it's we're all in it together kind of thing. It's just
in real
nonsense.
terms, the average British worker has not had a pay rise in nearly 40 years. 40 years. In real terms, what I mean by that is sort of the rise in wages minus inflation. So in 40 years, people are just the same off, but the economy has grown massively. But where has it all gone? Again, straight to the owners of capital, the bankers, the international financiers, the big business owners, stockbrokers. That's where it's all gone. You know, you've been working harder and harder. You've been working more hours. You've been having to cut back. You've been having, and you've had and ordinary people have had such a rough time for decades, and they've just been spat on every time and then blamed when things go wrong.
Yeah, that's what these statements from the Bank of England isn't it?
There's too much benefits in the system. Oh, there's too much. There's people. British workers aren't working hard enough. They don't want to do hard work anymore. all this nonsense, where people are having to work, 3 a.m., 1 a.m. to 1 p.m. shifts in Tesco, you know, heavy lifting boxes all day, or slaving away in an Amazon warehouse, you know, and people are being told you're not working hard enough when you're doing like graveyard shifts on a Sunday morning or on a bank holiday, trying to make ends meet for your family. And I am sick to death of people like, again, Karen Ward from the Bank of England, and just with this contempt, all these rich fat cats in the city of London, you know, with their cocaine getting emotional about it, with their cocaine parties, and their COVID lockdown breaking, and they're swanning around, and with their and their and I'm just sick of these people. I want to force someone to open your eyes, to see what you're doing.
Yeah, they've lost all legitimacy,
Mm.
haven't they? I mean, in the grand scheme of things, the government, the financial institutions, they've lost all legitimacy. They don't deserve to be in the positions that they're in. They don't deserve to be in control over the economy and the country in the way that they are. They really are odious people, most of them, who simply just view their citizens as cogs in a machine, as replaceable parts, there to be worked and made money from. And that kind of outlook, I think, in order to have a prosperous nation, not just in terms of economics, has to be challenged and has to be put to bed. This sort of that every relationship in society is economic transaction in one way or another. It's definitely something that needs to change.
So I want to spend the last few minutes essentially just saying what we would do. So firstly, we need a fundamental rethink of how the economy works. The economy of a nation is there to serve the welfare of the people, number one. Number two, the value of an economy is based off of its productive potential or its productive output, not on the value on a balance sheet of financial institutions, or even the amount of gold or the value of assets held in vaults or on asset books. It is what we make with our own hands: steel, cars, fancy cheeses, how what we
Tangible
consume,
goods.
tangible goods. That is what the value of an economy is. Number three is to re-nationalise the Bank of England. That was a big mistake of Tony Blair. I mean, the Bank of England wasn't brilliant before privatisation, but it really has led to this kind of detached and accountable attitude from central bankers in all around the world, but in particularly in the UK as well. This needs to end. These people need to be democratically accountable because they control so much of your life, how much you pay on your mortgage, how much you even pay for cost of living. That needs to be put back into public hands. So there's the things that need to be done on day one. There's other things that we should be doing. We should be looking at our energy security in the UK. The UK is a net exporter of oil and gas, and last year when all the stuff was kicking off in Russia, and unfortunately it's still going on, the UK, when you were paying record prices for your energy, your oil and gas, the sovereign resources of your country, of our country, were being exported on international markets for the highest bidder. And you who was benefiting from that? Private companies, BP and Shell, because they're the people who own North Sea oil. And this is not a radical policy. So the Norwegian government own their oil and gas. They own their share of North Sea oil and gas. And they put it into a sovereign wealth fund. They reinvest the profits into their nation, into their people, and they've got this gigantic $1 trillion wealth fund of a nation of only about 5 or 6 million people. I think it's about 20 or 30,000 US dollars per person in Norway, a massive amount. And Norway is not debt free. Something like that should have been done in the UK. So to immediately bring the price down of fuel. Again, another thing to be nationalised. BP and Shell, you can't really, because Shell is a Dutch company, but BP we can nationalise and give the rest of the contracts to BP. that's something, And again, we're not socialists in the Homeland Party. What we do say is that economic security comes first. So if your nation's energy security is being gambled by private interests in the international market, that can't happen. It can't, because it undermines our nation.
It's just
And,
it's, a, it's just a radical rethink, isn't it, of
it is.
what the wealth of a nation actually means.
Yes.
Like, a company like Amazon, who sets itself up and delivers products to people and sells products to people. Obviously, that is something that you can't really nationalize, because it's an entrepreneurial endeavor, isn't it? It's something that investors and people have come up with the idea. They've invested in it, and they are and people are purchasing their products. But when it comes to things like natural gas, oil, and fish, and things that are, like you say, that are belong to the sovereign state, then those assets need to be managed in the interests of the state.
Yeah.
That wealth belongs to its people. The oil that's in the North Sea was not put there by BP or Shell. Probably even wasn't discovered by them either.
No.
These are private, parasitical corporations that buy up national infrastructure to make profit. So it's a market that they haven't created. It's an existing market that they have, what you might say, commandeered it, muscled in on it.
Like, and I'd say too, even if you take an example like Amazon, a $1 trillion company that refuses to pay tax in any significant, and gets massive subsidies as well. I mean, the Welsh government gave this Amazon a massive subsidy to set up their distribution plant in Swansea, just off Fabian Way, if you know the area. Again, who built the roads? The government. Who built the internet?
People, yeah.
Who built the copper wiring and the what do you call it? The optical fibers and everything that runs the internet in this country? The state did. So then you have Amazon that makes all its profit on this infrastructure, which is owned and maintained most largely by the people of the country. And then it takes, and then it's only right that you pay back in with taxes, with corporation tax, because you're making money off
the people
the
want
infrastructure that we provide.
The people want a return on their investment.
Exactly.
Like we pay road taxes, we pay all these taxes that the government then uses to build infrastructure. But this is seen as a public expenditure. Well, no, let's start looking at it like this is a public investment.
Exactly.
And we want to see some return on this investment. And that's what these sovereign wealth funds should do, isn't it? Make sure that the public gets some return on these, on the investments that they make.
And they're starting to believe in the concept of national sovereignty. That we are a people of a nation with ancient traditions, and we deserve to have our homeland, and we have a right to it, and we have a right to a reasonable say in what we do. That's all we're asking for.
I think it's also important to mention that not to let the sort of scaremongering about population decline and things. Population decline would actually be good for the people of this country if you get rid of mass immigration. It will make housing more affordable. It'll mean that people can more easily start families.
The population of the UK today, Carl, I think it's 67, 68 million people, something like that. Do you know what the population of Britain, this is including the whole of Ireland at the time, was on the day of the Battle of Waterloo in 1815?
About 24 million?
It was less than that.
Yeah.
It was roughly around 12 million.
12 million.
I just check in case I do actually. I've got that completely wrong then, but it was significantly less. So you can see this country, yes, 11 million people in England and Wales, 6 million in Ireland, and I think probably a couple of million more in Scotland. So about it was significantly lower than it was today, And look at what we achieved. And again, lots of good, lots of bad. I'm not saying British Empire was all good and whatever, but I'm saying that again, don't be worried about population decline.
No,
I think it'd be this country would be healthier with probably about 50 million people in it, because that's what our post-war infrastructure, the motorways and things, are designed for. About 50 million people.
So if you are serious, if a country was serious about dealing with its birth rates, it population decline would not be a factor for them. In fact, it would be a natural occurrence in order to create, naturally create the space for newer generations to come forward and come forth and grow.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that we're trapped in this inflationary economy, and they can't allow housing prices to fall. They can't allow commodities and assets to become cheaper for you to buy. They just can't allow that. So this is what they do. The economy is theirs and it works for them, and that's the end of it. They don't care about the price of a house, because to them it's a commodity. It's something to be bought, held onto, and sold when appropriate, or leveraged against. For ordinary people, it's a home. You buy it, you live in it.
Yes. Yeah.
If you're lucky, when life is good to you, you might be able to pass it on to your children. That tiny little bit of tangible wealth that you can pass on to your family. But make no mistake, they're putting in policies that will soon get rid of that as well, especially when it comes to paying care, elderly paying for their own care and having to sell assets to pay for it. So you get an elderly
social care is a complete crisis at the moment.
So you get an elderly parent or grandparent, and they end up, getting dementia and have to live in a home. They will be stripped of everything that they own. They'll take every penny while looking after them, and then you're left with nothing to hand over to your children. So, I mean, this is the thing. A lot of it is criminal, the way that they view the people of this country, and the way that they just completely disregard them as just human beings. This is the thing about liberalism. In the long run, it just strips all humanity from everything. There's no morality, there's no humanity. It's all logic and reason,
And then you put that sort of the hyper-capitalist ethos in there, and it essentially just turns into who can dupe each other, who can screw each other over. That, and the person who scams the most is the winner. And it's this bargain basement race to the bottom. How many statues can I think of? But you know what I mean.
Well, I mean, look, there's an argument
because there is no concept of a kindness to your fellow man. It's all about the individual, isn't it?
That's it. There's an argument to be made that there are certain parts of the economy where that sort of competitive attitude is appropriate. But the problem is, it's been that sort of attitude with pluralism and diversity and all that has been added to every aspect of our life. Apparently this constant struggle and competition between different economic groups, religious groups, ethnic groups is apparently supposed to create a good standard of living or a common good. And I think we're really starting to see now that just is not the case. A lot of assumptions have been made in the economy and other areas that are just turning out not to be true. And the real reason is becoming very clear. It's just exploitation.
Yeah.
And it's sad, isn't it, when you think about it? I mean, this is what happened with communism. Just replace the capitalists with the corrupt politician or the corrupt technocrat who squeeze as much productivity out of their people as they possibly can, whilst giving them as little as possible.
Yes, yeah, and criminally underinvest in their own,
just
in their
completely
own future.
Dehumanise. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure we'll come back to these things.
Yes, I'm unfortunately we can't end on a white pill. I'm trying to think of a white pill quick, Carl.
What, with the economy?
I can't think of one.
No,
I think it's all a bit doom and gloom.
Unfortunately, I don't think there is a white pill. The white pill is that when you look at economic trends, it will get better, but obviously after it's already gotten worse. But it will get better. But I suppose
I don't know about you, but I'm digging my fallout bunker now. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Getting my tins of beans already. before they keep on going up. Buy now before they go up in price again.
With interest rates as they are and not likely to change anytime soon, a bit of advice is that saving is a good thing to do.
Yes, but that was another thing as well. Again, I don't want to dishearten you on that as well. But the banks aren't giving you much of an increase in your current account rates or savings account rates. They're not passing it on, these banks, because again, there's no regulation, there's no oversight, there's no one forcing them to do anything. So again, the only thing is the free market mechanism. But and it will cause problem for the bank, because if they don't raise people's savings rates significantly, what is going to start happening? People are just going to start putting it into money market funds and things like that, and they will pull their money from the banks, and that will hurt them. So they better buck up their ideas pretty quick, because they can't continue to screw their consumers anymore.
The truth is, we're not there yet. I think the key signs to be looking for is debt defaults and mortgage defaults. Once those start happening.
Yeah, I mean, if the average mortgage payer is now paying, if you're on a variable rate mortgage, if you are, I am sorry, but you must be paying hundreds of pounds more a month than you were a year and a half ago, and you must be really feeling it.
It's bad, isn't it? It's not nice. But yes, that's what will signify the sort of the debt deflation, the asset deflation is the defaults, because the banks will start going bust.
And I don't think this government has the political will is certainly there, but I don't think they have the money to scrape up to bail out.
Yeah, that was my concern. That's why they've gone for this sort of...
Because you can't cut interest rates. The Bank of England is desperately trying to control inflation, and it's getting out of control, and they keep on raising rates and rates and rates. So if you cut it, you're just going to... Inflation's going to start skyrocketing back up. And that hurts working people just as much. So it is, and then again, you can't. It's very easy to borrow so much money when you cut interest rates down to 0.25% or 0% or even a negative interest rate, like what the Bank of Japan did, and that's been doing. I think they reversed that policy now. But we had a few years when it was needed to sort things out, and things weren't sorted out. People were grifting. People were being corrupt. People were squirreling the money away. People were investing the money into assets. They weren't investing it into making a productive and healthy economy. So they've had their chance and they've blown it. So they can't do it again. It will cause a financial collapse, pandemonium.
Well, it'd be catastrophic for the nation, wouldn't it? You can't keep offloading these economic failures onto the public.
No,
because there's only so much tax that we can pay before the well runs dry. And
there is the theory of modern monetary theory, right? Yes, but I'm sympathetic to modern monetary theory. Sorry, this a little bit. It is extra hour stuff. So modern monetary theory, how do I explain in like 20 seconds? Essentially, it's a fundamental rethink of how money works and like taxation works. So it's sort of you view money as inflow and outflow from the central bank. It's essentially a way of sort of stimulating economic activity. It's a sort of maximalised quantitative easing. But the thing is as well, you actually do have to invest. There is a problem with what MMT theorists do. They think that inflation doesn't matter. They think that you can sort of run away, and that you can fund government spending indefinitely from quantitative easing and money printing. Again, that's all fine if your country actually has strong industrial backbone, is actually producing things. If you've got a fake economy like we do now, it doesn't work. It will catch up to you eventually. And we're seeing this now.
Yeah, I mean, I might just end on this because I think it's appropriate and I think it's quite funny. Not for the person involved, obviously, but for the situation that we're in. And the headline is that I am an educated Ukrainian refugee, and I was told that the only job available to me was a cleaning job. And I think that's indicative of the welcome to the low wage, high GDP UK economy. Like you've got a degree, don't matter, get cleaning for £8 an hour.
A complete waste of human talent and a waste of human life. It is, At least there was honesty and dignity in being a feudal peasant. You could work the land, you farmed your produce, you fed your family. There's no honour in having a master's degree and then getting a minimum wage job in some kind of service sector role. There's no honour in that.
Well, fleeing a war to be told to be a cleaner. That's very compassionate, exactly. Isn't it? Obviously, hopefully, when this war's over and Ukraine picks itself up, they'll have a period of growth and there'll be opportunities available to them.
We will hope.
Yes, we'll see. Right. I think we'll leave it there then. We'll obviously keep our eye on it all.
Yes,
And
and
we'll
we'll get back
update.
to the philosophy in due course, I trust.
Yeah, we'll get back to regular scheduled listening. So yeah. All right then. Thanks, Jerome, for that.
No problem, Carl. No problem
Very
at all. It's a pleasure.
interesting. A lot to think about.
Yes, and if any questions, wherever this gets put up, YouTube, Twitter, whatever, just if you have any questions, just leave a comment and I'll get around to it.
That's it. All right, folks. Catch you later.
Ta-da!